My name is David G. I've spent the last 41 years at the interface of knowledge and decision-making, occupational health, public health, environment. Spent the last 16 years at the European Environment Agency.
Oh, yeah.
So this stuff is bread and butter, and I love it. Thank you very much, and congratulations on it. 3 quick questions based on that experience. Number 1, how are you defining the difference between knowledge, information, and behind that data? In your one graphic in the book, it's short of graphics, by the way, you've got a lovely keystone in an arch saying that's the knowledge, and below you refer to information. I'm intrigued by your difference between the two, because we worked hard on that and I've got some thoughts about it. Secondly, user needs. Our main users were in the EEA, DG, and the Commission in Brussels. Very often, those desk sergeants, as I call them, in the policy-making world, they wanted quick technical info to help them with tomorrow's job. They were not really in the business of what we call conceptual knowledge, which is actually transforming how you see a problem. We call it structured knowledge. So for transport, if you think it's a supply-side problem, you build roads.
Yeah.
If you think it's a demand-side problem, you do better planning.
Yes.
A complete reversal of approach, really. So I'm intrigued by that. And your view about how you actually lead users, as you hinted at, you said 10 years ahead. Providers have to be in advance of most users because the users don't really know what they actually need, either today sometimes, conceptual versus technical, or in 10 years' time. So your view on that will be interesting. And lastly, I've observed the quality of media reporting on science in the UK compared to where I was in Denmark for 15 years and Germany and Holland is rubbish on average. What do you plan to do about that? Either bypassing the mainstream media or upgrading their attempts to be better at it? I'd be intrigued by the answer.
Since you kind of asked 3 questions in one go, I think I might ask Florian to respond to you first, and for others, perhaps just one at a time.
Always better to go first.
Yeah, for the first question is a very good one. That was one of the most controversial discussions we had in the group itself about what is data, what is information, what is knowledge. There is a page in the manifesto, page 25, where we try to define it. We, in the beginning, had a much more controversial definition of it, I would say. We got some pushback from some people. We said that information is all the facts in the world that can be recorded. Knowledge is when someone takes it up, when someone learns it, and then it is turned into knowledge. That was a bit too radical for some, so we had to tone it a little bit down. But you'll see the definitions of those 3 on that page. Because it is a collaborative approach, we try to define it as well as possible so that there is an agreement on it. But I just can echo your comment about that this is very difficult, and obviously you spend a lot of time also to think about it. And this is a very difficult definition thing. For the second question, I wasn't exactly sure on what the question was.
Your as it were, fetish about user needs.
Yeah.
My experience is users often on their day job or in their future job have a very unclear idea as to what their real needs are.
Yeah.
It's a little bit top down,
Yes.
but it's well borne out by experience.
Absolutely, and I think that this is also one of the things that was recognized in lots of the interviews, and we try to capture that with the unaware user, which is one of the user types that knowledge brokers need to broker to. So as said, there is this big range of different user needs, and it starts with users who are even not aware of the need, and he needs knowledge brokers to cater to that, to provide information to those who might need it but even don't know about it yet. Equally important than with the other groups. James is...
Sorry. Let me introduce also James Smith from REAP, who's actually been the other instrumental lead author. James, would you like to go shuffle your chair up here? I forgot to invite you to do that.
I just wanted to come in on both those points, really. I think they're very interesting, and as Florian says, things that we talked about.
Can you get close to the microphone so we can...
This model on data, information and knowledge, it was infogeneering.net was the site that we found, where a guy has this very clear definition. Unfortunately, he's uncontactable. He's not clear about how to get to him. So we weren't able to have a discussion with him, but it has this very clear definition of knowledge is not something that's written down. This book is not knowledge. This book is information. And it's only if you learn or accept what's in it that it becomes your knowledge. Knowledge has to be held by people. And I think that what that did for us in the process of writing the book was emphasize the importance of learning as a role of the knowledge brokers, something that knowledge brokers need to be concerned with. It's something that Fatima and Claire have talked about, the capacity building element of this. It's no use just providing someone with information if they don't accept it and they don't learn it, and then they're not going to be able to use it. And then you have failed as a knowledge broker because you haven't enabled them to take their climate-sensitive decision based on high-quality information. So I think that's a really key point. But as Florian says, not everyone agrees with this. There's something called the DIKW pyramid, which you can look up on Wikipedia and spend an awful lot of time disappearing down that rabbit hole if you want to. On the second point, one of our contributors in producing the manifesto is from the Climate Technology Centre and Network, based in Copenhagen, and what they do is provide guidance to least developed countries on technology needs related to climate. And they said that one of the things that they hadn't envisaged when they set up was just the length of time of the engagement with those countries to help them to define what the question is that they're seeking an answer to. And I think that's the point for knowledge brokers, is you have to factor that into your planning for your engagement with your users, is how are you going to help them refine their question.
And the third question was about the media reporting, which is
a difficult one for us, to be honest. Well, we have several media representatives in the group. It's not mainstream media, but it's more specialized media. And we didn't spend an awful lot of time on that topic yet, I have to say. So it's, that might be something.
We
asked Laurie to say something.
Laurie Goering from Thomson Reuters has been at this interface for quite a number of years. Would you like to kind of respond to that?
Sure. I mean, I think the media is a very broad church, and they have lots of different reasons and different audiences and ways of going about conveying information for good or bad or otherwise. Yeah. So I think it's useful to understand who you're speaking to and who their audience is when you talk with journalists and try to explain something to them, because if you're talking to me, who works on climate change full time and is interested in development issues and that kind of thing, it's one thing. And if you're speaking to the one of the more scandalous newspapers, that they're looking for something else, and you need to keep that in mind in the way that you speak to them and the information you present. Your audience, as you've said, both in the terms of their audience and your own. So I mean, would not be someone who defends all journalists that they are a bastion of accurately conveying every bit of information. There's a very wide range of people, but I would say look for journalists and publications that you know and that you have some experience with, build relationships with reporters, and that's a way to know who will be able to get information out well.
I'd like to just bring in Ishbel Matheson, who is the Director of Communications here.
I'm a former journalist.
Yes.
Just one of the points that I thought would be useful in this context is also to think about language. You mentioned it briefly up here, but for me, some of the issues that come out about reporting, media reporting, is really about this thicket of terminology that surrounds climate issues, all of which, you understand, you're conversant in, but for other people, for either policymakers, and we're talking about kind of senior ministers who are learning a brief, or for senior media who are maybe not like Laurie, who've worked on it for a long time, but are nevertheless very influential. It is incredibly hard to get your head around some of this language, whether it's as simple as mitigation and adaptation. I'm sure you all know what that means. it's completely impenetrable to a lot of people out there in
Yeah.
senior influential positions. So my sense is around the knowledge brokering thing, thinking hard about language, you know, what language is needed to carry and persuade people in different audiences. And in particular for me around that public and policy making audience. How do we break down some of the language that we're using to convey the big ideas? Because if we can't carry the public and influential policymakers, then we're much more blunted in the way that, you know, who we're influencing and the reach that we have.
Yeah. Very good point. Let's move on to a couple more questions. There's already one identified hand up at the, right at the far end. Charlotte, if you could, and then there's one right here too.
Certainly. I'm John Carstensen. I'm Head of Profession for Climate and Environment in DFID. So I will definitely take the encouragement to look at signing up to this back to DFID and discuss that. We see ourselves, in a sense, both as a funder of knowledge, but also as a broker of knowledge. So we're in that entire spectrum. And I would like to hear your views on basically two dilemmas in this, and it comes back to the issue of the use of language. Because the climate issues are always very sector specific. So we like to talk about climate change, but the users that require the information, they talk about agriculture, they talk about water, they talk about their infrastructure. And how will you as knowledge brokers get outside the box of talking climate change and talk about the other issues that the users of the information that is their starting point. And linked to that, how do you plan to deal with the issues of the trade-offs that are sort of intrinsic to a climate-smart poverty reduction? It's not straightforward. It's a lot easier when you are in an economy that needs to do a lot to reduce their CO2 emissions. But when you have a dual objective, how do you see that you can deal with that, and what are your thoughts on addressing that in your knowledge brokering? Thank you.
Okay, let's just take one. I'll take one more question from over here, because there's, again, some really rich questions coming through here.
Hello, my name's Jordan. I work for Brunswick Group. We're a kind of corporate advisory firm. And my role is helping multinationals develop their response to kind of environmental and developmental issues around the world. So I guess my question is around the linkages between using environmental data to inform kind of better development outcomes. And I wonder if the panel could kind of give some more examples of who's doing this particularly well, what are the emerging trends, what's kind of best practice in this space, just kind of some pointers that we could learn from would be really helpful.
Okay, I think I'll pause there. Would you like to tackle some of that? The first one, yeah.
In terms of the how to get the outside of the box information also into play, I think this is one of the essentials when we talked about these chains of knowledge brokers and having the knowledge brokers always have to be part of different sectors. Especially in climate, we heard from a lot of interviewees that this is an absolutely essential thing. That knowledge brokers have to understand that they have to think and connect outside of their own box to get this, to synthesize the information from various different sectors to make it useful for the user at the end. And I think I would totally agree to what you said. It's absolutely essential to not just focus on the obvious climate parts, but also take the other sectors into consideration. And I think that is a call to the knowledge brokers that we make here in the manifesto to not forget about this, even if it sounds difficult sometimes in the beginning.
Yeah, I should perhaps add, I think for a lot of the knowledge brokers who've been involved in this process, they're on a journey themselves, and they often started out, as many of us, as kind of quite supply-led initiatives. I think this learning process about needing to get to your users, understanding users, connect to what they're doing is one of the really big messages that's coming through the process of talking to each other and learning, and we're not very good at it yet.
Sorry, can I?
Would you like to? Sorry. Roger, would you like to?
It's really interesting, and it leads into some of your earlier question too, is that one of the most difficult things, and I think it's what Vicky was also getting at and mentioning as well, is that informed engagement between users and providers and brokers is essential, because you learn more about each other and to be able to understand the questions that people are asking. But getting at your specific question is that through that informed engagement, what we're finding is that decisions that are being made start out very much sector focused, but they soon move away from that sector focus, because there's a realization, if you just respond on a sector basis, there's increasing realization, I should say, by some, that if you just respond on a sector basis, you're more likely to be ineffective, cost ineffective, whatever way you want to look at it, because then you find out that take your example of agriculture. Agriculture is very sensitive to water, and therefore you have to integrate across the agricultural sector and the water sector. And then, and that's just a simple one that you could look at, and you start looking at water abstraction, so you have to work with the hydrological community as well. And the way I see operation is essential is that you're sharing knowledge, you're learning together, and you're developing the knowledge and the information and the provision of that information together. If you do it just as an individual or as a broker by yourself, we've got lots of examples of those. They're doing all right now, but they're starting to falter, is that you need to work as a community on this. And that's what Vicky was talking about, I think, with it as well, is really pulling on this idea of working together to develop the information and to continue to allow it to evolve.
Vicky, would you like to add anything?
I just wanted to add something from a kind of underpinning evidence information. I think that it's becoming increasingly evident that just looking at climate change in isolation isn't good enough. So when you're looking at, just in the urban environment, for example, air quality and climate change have a very strong interaction. When you start to look at agriculture, then you've got to look at how the biology behaves. And so as we start to work more with users, we're starting to realise that actually we need to look at these sorts of issues. And the way that science is funded in this country, and I think probably in others as well, actually makes that very difficult. So we've got an initiative with Living with Environmental Change programme at the moment, which I'm leading, to try and look at the interactions between air quality and climate change. What are the research needs that underpin the policy requirements? And that will be true across a number of different issues that arise from when you start to look at this sector-specific information. So I think that is really, a really important. And the other aspect of this is, which kind of feeds through that, is I see that it's a two-way process. It's not about just understanding what questions people are asking, but actually it's about the people providing information learning from those people about what actually some of the issues are, and how you build those issues into looking at the climate change problem. So I think we can all learn from each other. It's not just a one-way process.
Okay. Would you like to pick up on that challenge of looking for some actual examples of where access to information has linked to sort of development outcomes and the end result of this?
Active examples.
Yes. With that, what Jordan was getting at, sort of.
Yeah, I mean either specific examples or just kind of general principles.
Yeah.
No, there's a project that I'm working on, which is really looking at how data can be better accessed from, for example, the Kenya Met Agency. But used by different types of actors, including entrepreneurs, innovators, who think about what kind of adaptation action they can take in a much more collective way. Mm. And it's kind of encouraging that kind of process by creating partnerships and networks between these actors, and then creating spaces for them to actually come together and do things. So there are multiple examples out there of how people are thinking increasingly about creating those spaces for those conversations to happen. We're just kind of going to the point about how you kind of make some of these issues more intersectoral. interdisciplinary. There's something that I've been just recently involved in, where the gender group within this funding agency and the climate change group within the funding agency had never really come together to talk about how gender and climate change can be better integrated. Yet they were talking about it in their specific, kind of areas. And it was again kind of, bringing them together, actually creating a trusted space where they could have those conversations and ask those questions that they usually really uneasy asking. But I think a lot of that is about relationship building and creating safe spaces where they feel that they're able to articulate some of those.
So the broker role is not just about kind of adding more to the bucket and pouring more over people's heads. It's actually creating the spaces where they can take a shower. I don't know, that's not a good idea. Okay, go. James.
I think one example that's very interesting that links very strongly to the world of business is is weather-related insurance, which has been taken up pretty broadly in the United States, and I think developed out of there. The availability of meteorological data to a very fine degree as open data provided by the government has been taken up by companies and used to develop insurance products. And that idea has then been taken up in other countries and is now used in Africa and Latin America as well. So I think that would be one particular example. And in answer to your question, page 87.
Oh, right. Vicky, quick.
I've got an example from weather forecasting. So the major typhoons that affect many parts of the world, but particularly just thinking about Bangladesh, for example, in the past they've led to thousands of deaths. But the new forecasting systems, which very high technology, satellites, big computer models that we run and the Americans run and the Europeans run, provide very good forecasts now of when these are going to hit landfall and cause problems, but that technology on its own isn't enough. You've actually got to have a means of getting that information out to people and places that people can go to be protected from that. And so they have, people have wind-up radios. There are whole mechanisms for providing that information to people in a way that people can access, obviously, very quickly in that situation. And also they have storm shelters. And so now the devastation, you still get the devastation to people's houses and their livelihoods, but not to danger to life. So.
I just want to make a connection to a comment that's come in from one of the online watchers, Alexander von Hildebrand, who's the WHO regional coordinator for the Pacific, based in Manila. And the big point he's making is about urgency. He's saying, yes, it's all about being well organised, but there's a sense of urgency in what we're focusing on here. It's about translating data and information into concrete adaptation and preparedness action. We are already feeling the first impacts of this year's El Nino. You can see that there is an urgency to this. So I think this talks to the kind of the massive job to be done out there, which we are just starting to scratch the surface of. We are kind of coming to the end. We're just past our day. I'm going to just take, if you forgive me, just two more questions before we wrap up. And I see a hand at the back first, and the second hand, one here in the front. If you need to sneak out, please don't feel embarrassed.
Thank you. My name's Candice Howarth. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Global Sustainability Institute in Cambridge. And I've been doing quite a bit of research around the role of different types of evidence and information to better inform decision making. I've just finished a project on the role of non-academic evidence in informing the IPCC Working Group 2 report, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In looking in the manifesto quickly, the IPCC is mentioned twice in two of your quotes, where the quotes, the end users actually say they don't find the IPCC reports useful to inform their decision making. So just going forward after today, do you have any plans to engage with the IPCC, particularly as there's a new chair that's about to be elected? Thank you.
And the second question here? Yeah.
Thank you. Karina Wyborn from the Luke Hoffman Institute. Thank you. This is very interesting and a really great initiative. I just wanted to pick up on the capacity building question, something that we think about a lot. We are a knowledge broker to connect science with conservation practice. And we think a lot about what are the capacities that you need to be a broker. So one of the things that got mentioned here before around how do you get people to be able to articulate their research question, their needs as a research question. So just wondering wondering any other reflections from the panel around some of the things that you think are particularly important capacities to actually do this brokering role. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Good point. Lauren, would you like to pick off either of those?
I think regarding the IPCC question, yes, we heard that from some interviewees. I think there is a very good example here on where they told us that this was correct for them, which is the CDKN report on reports on the IPCC reports, which brought it together to the basics that they need to understand, and that was actually a very good piece of knowledge brokering, I think. The engagement with IPCC definitely very welcome. Yeah, so I think that's definitely something to do.
Drop them a line.
On the second question, it's a really interesting question because, as I said, I've been involved in looking at this activity for a number of years, and in fact, we've been having discussions in about the last 6 or 7 years of how do we build the capacity of this community. It's a very difficult question to look at. We find when we see people in this community, they're normally drawn from the research community, and yet there isn't a future for a researcher in this community. It is not that type of people of position. So different organizations around the world have been trying to figure out how they establish and how they continue to evolve the capacity of the knowledge brokers. There's different thoughts out there. Trying to legitimize the role within the academic community is a requirement. If you want to draw on the academic committee, you have to legitimize this knowledge exchange, knowledge broker role, and it is not. You can't publish, you're not recognized, but we've recently, I'm involved, and we've recently started a new journal on climate. It's called Climate Services, not Climate Brokerage. So we've got a new journal which is hoping to try and deal with some of this. But also it's looking at where do we get the proper skills, because the skills are quite different in this area too, because it's about knowledge exchange, it's about engagement, it's about the research and the sciences, the different sciences you have to come across. It's a transdisciplinary type of research or activity, I think, that needs to be done. And so there is a lot to do in that way, and there's nothing in the universities to allow you to develop this way. There's nothing anywhere. So it's a lot of on-the-job training. So I know I've been working with the people at the German, they've just changed the name of it, and I've just forgotten it, German Climate Service Center, where we had these initial discussions about 5 or 6 years ago, and really trying to figure out how we're going to deal with this. Big question, big unknown.
Yes. Vicky?
So having got many colleagues in the Met Office who are part of IPCC and sort of been close to it and perhaps a little bit removed from it now, I tried to get across to scientists that people are finding IPCC very impenetrable, and they just don't really quite get it. And the more people that can actually articulate what is needed, the better, I think, because it is becoming a bit of an end in itself. I think, I've had scientists say things like to me, and this happens in a lot of contexts, if only people understood climate models better, everything would be all right. Well, actually, no. No, that's not the problem. I mean, I found when you're trying to work with a particular sector, the thing that works the best is you go to them. So you go to their conferences. You don't expect them to come to yours. And you have to embed, maybe you need to embed knowledge brokers within those sectors. So you need somebody, in an engineering sector who becomes the expert for their sector, but they start off with that engineering knowledge. So it actually needs to come from both sides, I think.
Can I just add one? Just to kind of following on from what you're saying, I think another area around capacity is also working with local organizations. I mean, not everything can be done from where we sit. I think in terms of local context, building the capacity and supporting local organizations to be able to digitize content that might otherwise not be available yet. But also, supporting their skill sets so that they're able to meet the needs in those respective countries is a really big, an undertaking, and I think it's something that we could be doing collectively in a much more sort of, centralized way here.
Well, let me attempt to wrap up. Before I do that, I want to just introduce my colleague Mary Dupar, who was involved in a big exercise that CDKN attempted recently to translate some of the IPCC findings. So Mary will be able to talk to you about some of the challenges there, and I think some of the successes which were very appreciated by the IPCC itself. let me wrap up. And I think this question of recognising and the capacity and the importance of the knowledge broker role and building that role is actually what this is all about. And the group, the knowledge broker group, one of the things which it has been really good at, I think, which has provided the glue to bring it together, is that it's been a very nice forum for actually sharing what you don't know. You know, I'm trying to do this, but I don't know how to. I'm trying to engage my user group, but I don't know how to do it. But I've tried it over here. I've tried it over here, and there's a lot of real cross-learning going on. And I think everybody who comes into that, they often think they know a lot about knowledge brokering, and within about half a day they realise actually they're only just scratching the surface. But together we know a lot more. And I think this collaborative approach to this is the big story. And I hope it's a story that resonates with you. And I hope you will take up the Florian's invitation to sign up and say, yes, we approve of this. But we'd really appreciate your help in actually spreading the message. And maybe in a couple of years' time, a climate knowledge broker will be somebody that is recognised, and it'll be a much more established kind of discipline. And it'll be something which is funded in a secure way, rather than being something which tends to be tacked on at the end of a project, and something which funders think about naturally, because it's actually, well, obviously this needs to be done well, this job. How else are we going to get on top of climate issues unless we do this job really well? So we hope that this revolution is on the way, and we hope you will join the barricades to make it happen. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you, speakers, for taking part.